The stagecoach lurched to a stop in Fort Stockton, Texas, and Grace Brennan pressed herself against the worn leather seat as the driver's boots hit the ground with a thud that made her flinch so hard her bonnet slipped sideways. It was August 1877, and the heat shimmered off the dusty main street like water, but Grace felt cold despite the oppressive warmth. Her fingers twisted in the fabric of her gray traveling dress, the only nice thing she owned, and she forced herself to breathe slowly through her nose the way her mother had taught her before the fever took her 3 years ago. The door swung open with a creak, and Grace's whole body jerked at the sound. "Miss Brennan?" The driver peered inside, his weathered face creased with concern. "We are here, Fort Stockton." Grace nodded, not trusting her voice. She had traveled all the way from Pennsylvania, answering an advertisement from a rancher named Duncan Stone who needed a wife. The letters had been kind, practical, and honest. He had explained he was 32 years old, owned a cattle ranch outside town, and wanted a companion to share his life. She had written back explaining she was 24, alone in the world, and willing to start fresh somewhere new. She had not explained why she jumped at every unexpected noise, why loud sounds sent her heart racing and her hands trembling. Some things were too difficult to put into words. The driver helped her down, and her feet touched Texas soil for the first time. Fort Stockton was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of wooden buildings baking under the relentless sun. A general store, a saloon with doors that swung gently in the hot breeze, a church with a white steeple, and various other establishments lined the main street. Cattle lowed in the distance, and somewhere a dog barked. Each sound made Grace's shoulders tense. "Miss Brennan?" She turned toward the voice and found herself looking at a tall man with dark hair and serious gray eyes. He stood a respectful distance away, hat in his hands, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. He wore working clothes, a dusty shirt and worn trousers, boots that had seen years of use. His face was tanned from the sun with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled sometimes, though he was not smiling now. "Mr. Stone?" she managed, and was grateful her voice did not shake. "Duncan," he said. "Just Duncan, if you are comfortable with that." He took a step toward her, and she held her ground, though her instinct was to step back. "I hope the journey was not too difficult." "It was long," Grace admitted, "but I'm grateful to be here." A wagon rattled past behind them, and Grace spun toward the sound, her heart hammering. When she turned back, Duncan was watching her with those thoughtful gray eyes, but he said nothing about her reaction. Instead, he gestured toward where his wagon waited. "I thought we might get married at the church today, if you are willing," he said quietly. "Reverend Matthews is expecting us, but if you need time to rest first, we can wait. There is a boarding house where you could stay." Grace thought about the money she did not have, about the fact that she had nowhere else to go, about how she had made this choice deliberately and carefully. "Today is fine," she said. "I agreed to marry you, and I keep my word." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes. "Then let us go meet the Reverend." The ceremony was brief and simple. The church was blessedly cool after the heat outside, and Reverend Matthews was a kind older man who spoke the words of the marriage service in a gentle voice. Duncan produced a simple gold band and slid it onto her finger. His hands were calloused and careful, and he met her eyes as he said his vows. Grace repeated her own vows, and then it was done. She was married to this stranger, bound to him by law and by God. They walked out into the afternoon sunshine as husband and wife. Duncan helped her into the wagon, and she noticed how slowly he moved, how he telegraphed each motion before he made it. He climbed up beside her and took the reins. "The ranch is about 5 miles out," he said. "We should be there before dark. Are you hungry? We could stop at the restaurant if you want." "I am fine," Grace said, though her stomach was empty. The thought of sitting in a restaurant full of strangers and noise made her feel ill. Duncan nodded and clicked his tongue softly to the horses. The wagon rolled forward, and Fort Stockton fell away behind them. The landscape opened up into vast stretches of dry grassland dotted with scrub brush and the occasional tree. The sky was enormous, bigger than any sky Grace had ever seen back east. It felt like you could see forever in every direction. They rode in silence for a while. Grace gripped the edge of the wagon seat and tried to calm her racing thoughts. She was married now. This was her life. She had chosen this. "Grace," Duncan said finally, his voice low and even, "I want you to know something. Whatever happened to you before you came here, whatever made you so skittish, you do not have to tell me unless you want to. But you are safe now. I give you my word on that." Her throat tightened. "Thank you," she whispered. "I also want you to know that I do not expect anything from you tonight except your company at supper. We have a spare room. You can sleep there until you feel comfortable with other arrangements." He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "I married you because I liked your letters and I thought we might suit each other. I hope we can be friends first and see what comes after." Grace felt something loosen in her chest. "I would like that." They rode on, and Grace studied her new husband from the corner of her eye. He had strong hands on the reins, steady and sure. His profile was handsome in a rough-hewn way, all angles and strength. But it was the quietness about him that struck her most. He did not seem like a man who would yell or slam doors or make her jump. The ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun began to sink lower. It was modest but well-maintained. A house with a wide porch, a barn, several corrals, and a few outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, red and brown shapes against the golden grass. Duncan pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake, then climbed down and came around to help Grace descend. "Welcome home," he said simply. The house was surprisingly neat inside. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace and a wooden table with chairs. 2 doors led off to what she assumed were bedrooms. Everything was clean but sparse, the home of a man who lived alone and saw no reason for frills. "The room on the left is mine," Duncan said, setting her trunk down by the door. "The one on the right can be yours. There is a pump out back for washing. I will show you everything tomorrow, but for tonight, let me make us some supper." He moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, building up the fire in the stove and setting a pot to boil. Grace watched, uncertain what to do with herself. She was used to working to keeping her hands busy. "Can I help?" she asked. "You can sit and rest," Duncan said. "You have been traveling for days. There will be plenty of work tomorrow if you want it." But sitting made her feel more anxious, so Grace stood and found plates in the cupboard, setting the table while Duncan cooked. He made a simple stew with beef and vegetables, and they sat down to eat as the light faded outside the windows. "Tell me about the ranch," Grace said, needing to fill the silence. "How long have you been here?" 5 years, Duncan said. "I worked for other ranchers before that, saved my money, and bought this land. It is not much yet, but it is growing. I have about 200 head of cattle right now, and I'm hoping to increase that. The market for beef is good." "Do you manage it all yourself?" "Mostly. I have 2 hands who come help during roundup and branding, but day to day, it is just me." He paused. "Just us now." Grace nodded, absorbing this. "I can help. I am a hard worker. I can cook and clean, tend a garden. I can learn other things." "I am sure you can." Duncan met her eyes across the table. "But like I said, we will take things slow. You have been through a lot these past days." After supper, Duncan showed her to the spare room. It was small but clean, with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the darkening prairie. Her trunk sat at the foot of the bed. "I am usually up before dawn," Duncan said from the doorway, "but you sleep as long as you need. Good night, Grace." "Good night, Duncan." He closed the door softly, and Grace was alone. She sat on the bed and looked around her new room, in her new home, in her new life. The silence was profound after the constant noise of the stagecoach and the towns she had passed through. Out here there was only the whisper of wind and the distant sounds of cattle. Grace changed into her nightgown, lay down on the bed, and stared at the ceiling. She did not expect to sleep, but exhaustion pulled her under eventually. She dreamed of Pennsylvania, of the factory where she had worked after her mother died, of the machines that clanged and roared all day long. She dreamed of the foreman who had cornered her in the storage room, whose hands had grabbed her arms and whose voice had been rough with drink. She had fought him off and run, but she had lost her position for it. After that, she could not find work. The other factories would not hire her after the foreman spread rumors. She had been desperate and alone when she saw the advertisement for mail-order brides heading west. Grace woke in the darkness to the sound of a door opening, and she sat bolt upright, her heart pounding. But it was only Duncan moving quietly through the house. She heard the soft clink of the stove being tended, the gentle sounds of someone trying not to wake another person. Grace dressed in the darkness and emerged from her room to find Duncan making coffee in the dim light of an oil lamp. He looked up, surprised. "You did not have to get up." "I want to help," Grace said. "I want to be useful." Duncan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. There are eggs in the coop if you want to gather them. I will start on the other chores." They worked in the pre-dawn darkness, Grace collecting eggs while Duncan tended the horses. As the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they made breakfast together and ate while the world woke up around them. This became their pattern. Grace rose when Duncan did, and they shared the morning chores. She learned where everything was, how Duncan liked things done. She cooked and cleaned and started planning a garden. Duncan was patient with her questions and careful in his movements. She noticed how he never slammed doors, how he warned her before he did anything that might make a loud noise. One morning, about a week after she arrived, Duncan was shoeing a horse in the corral when the hammer slipped and struck the anvil with a sharp, ringing clang. Grace, who had been hanging laundry nearby, dropped the sheet she was holding and stumbled backward, her breath coming fast and shallow. Duncan set down the hammer immediately and walked toward her slowly, his hands visible and empty. "Grace," he said softly, "you are all right. It was just the hammer. I am sorry." She pressed her hand to her chest, trying to slow her racing heart. "I know, I am sorry. I know it is foolish." "It is not foolish." Duncan stopped a few feet away from her. "Something happened to you, something that made loud noises frightening. That is not foolishness. That is your body trying to keep you safe." Grace looked up at him. This man she barely knew, who had somehow seen straight through to the heart of her fear. "How did you know?" "I have seen it before," Duncan said quietly, "during the war. Men who came back and could not stand the sound of fireworks or doors slamming. They would shake and sweat, and some people called them cowards, but they were not. They had just seen and heard things that changed them." "You were in the war?" Grace asked. "For 2 years. I was 17 when I enlisted, 19 when I came home." His gray eyes were distant. "I saw things no one should see, heard things no one should hear. It took me a long time to feel normal again." Grace bent to pick up the fallen sheet, and Duncan helped her. Their hands touched briefly, and she did not pull away. "I worked in a factory," she said, the words coming slowly, "in Philadelphia. The machines were so loud you could not hear yourself think. And the foreman, he was a cruel man. He liked to come up behind the women workers and shout in their ears or slam his hand down on the table to make us jump. He thought it was funny." She swallowed hard. "One day he did more than that. He cornered me and tried to force himself on me. I fought him off, but after that I could not go back. Every loud sound made me think he was coming for me again." Duncan's jaw tightened. "I am glad you fought him off, and I'm glad you came here." "I had nowhere else to go," Grace admitted. "Maybe that is how it started," Duncan said. "But you are here now and you are safe. I will never hurt you, Grace, and I will do my best not to frighten you." From that day forward, Duncan moved like a ghost around the ranch. He learned to set things down gently, to announce himself before entering a room, to work without clanging or banging. Grace noticed all of it. She noticed how he had changed his entire way of moving through the world for her comfort. It made something warm bloom in her chest, something she was almost afraid to name. The weeks passed, and summer deepened into the scorching heat of late August. Grace's garden began to produce vegetables, and she took pride in serving food she had grown herself. She learned to recognize the sounds of the ranch, the cattle, the horses, the wind through the grass. The more familiar the sounds became, the less they frightened her. Duncan taught her to ride, choosing the gentlest mare and spending patient hours helping Grace gain confidence in the saddle. They rode out together to check on the cattle, and Grace marveled at the vastness of the land. She had lived her whole life in cramped city streets, and the endless Texas prairie felt like freedom. One evening in early September, they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and red. The heat had finally broken, and a cool breeze made the evening pleasant. "Grace," Duncan said, his voice thoughtful, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you happy here?" He turned to look at her. "I know this is not what you are used to. It is isolated, and the work is hard. If you are unhappy, I want to know." Grace considered the question seriously. "I am happier than I have been in a long time," she said honestly. "I was so lost in Philadelphia. I felt like I was drowning, like every day was just trying to survive until the next one. Here, I feel like I have a purpose, like I matter." "You do matter," Duncan said quietly, "more than you know." Their eyes met, and Grace felt her breath catch. In the fading light, Duncan's face was serious and handsome, and she realized with a start that she had grown to care for him deeply. Somewhere between the careful way he moved around her and the patient way he answered her questions, between the shared meals and the quiet evenings, she had fallen in love with her husband. "Duncan," she said softly, "I think I would like to move into your room, if the offer is still open." His eyes widened slightly, then warmed. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." That night, Grace moved her things into Duncan's room, and he held her with a gentleness that made her want to weep. He was careful and patient, asking permission with every touch, and Grace felt safe in a way she had not felt since before her mother died. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, and Duncan stroked her hair while she pressed her ear to his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she whispered, not sure if he was still awake. "I love you too," he replied, his voice rumbling in his chest. "I think I have since I read your first letter." September gave way to October, and the weather cooled. Duncan hired 2 ranch hands for the fall roundup, 2 brothers named Tom and Charlie who were respectful and hardworking. Grace was nervous about having strangers around, but Duncan spoke to them privately, and they were careful around her, never making sudden movements or loud noises when she was nearby. The roundup was hard work. Duncan and the brothers spent long days riding the range, gathering cattle and driving them to the home corrals. Grace cooked for all of them, making huge meals that the hungry men devoured. In the evenings, Tom sometimes played the harmonica, soft and sweet, and they would all sit together under the stars. Grace found she liked Tom and Charlie. They treated her with respect and told funny stories about their adventures on other ranches. They had grown up in Texas and knew the land intimately. Charlie was 26 and engaged to a girl in Fort Stockton. Tom was 29 and claimed he was too restless to settle down, though Grace noticed how he looked at the school teacher when they all went to town for supplies. One afternoon, Grace was in the garden harvesting the last of the tomatoes when she heard a rattling sound nearby. She froze, her hands full of tomatoes, and looked down to see a snake coiled near her feet. Its tail was raised, shaking in warning. Grace's breath stopped in her throat. She wanted to scream, to run, but she knew sudden movement would make the snake strike. "Grace, do not move." Duncan's voice came from somewhere behind her, low and steady. "Do not move a muscle." She stood perfectly still, her heart hammering, her eyes fixed on the snake. She heard Duncan moving, slow and deliberate. Then there was a sharp crack, and the snake's head separated from its body. Duncan had thrown a shovel with perfect accuracy. Grace stumbled backward, and Duncan caught her, pulling her against his chest. She shook violently, and he held her tight. "You are safe," he murmured into her hair. "You are safe. It is dead. It cannot hurt you." "I was so scared," Grace gasped. "I know. But you did exactly right. You stayed still and you trusted me." He pulled back to look at her face. "You are so brave, Grace. Braver than you know." That night, Grace could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the snake. Duncan held her and talked to her in the darkness, telling her stories about growing up in Missouri, about his family who had died in a cholera outbreak when he was 15, about how he had made his way west alone and scared. He talked until Grace finally relaxed and slept. In the morning, she woke to find Duncan already up and making breakfast. When she emerged from the bedroom, he smiled at her. "How do you feel about going to town today?" he asked. "Yes, there is a harvest dance on Saturday, and I thought we might go, unless you would rather not." Grace thought about crowds and noise and strangers, and her instinct was to refuse. But she thought about how Duncan had changed his entire life to make her comfortable, and she wanted to try for him. "I would like that," she said. Saturday dawned clear and cool, perfect fall weather. Grace, dressed in her best dress, a blue calico she had made from fabric Duncan brought her from town. Duncan wore clean trousers and a pressed shirt, and he looked so handsome that Grace felt her heart skip. They rode to Fort Stockton in the wagon, and Grace tried not to be nervous. The town was crowded with people coming in from surrounding ranches for the dance. The schoolhouse had been cleared out and decorated with fall leaves and ribbons. A small band was setting up in the corner, tuning their instruments. Duncan kept close to Grace's side as they entered, and she appreciated his solid presence. People greeted them warmly, and several women came over to introduce themselves. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the general store, was particularly kind. "It is so good to see Duncan with a wife," she said, beaming. "He has been alone too long. You must come to the ladies' quilting circle on Thursdays. We meet at the church." The music started, and couples began to dance. Duncan turned to Grace and held out his hand. "May I?" he asked. Grace had not danced in years, but she put her hand in his and let him lead her onto the floor. The music was lively, a fiddle and a guitar playing a cheerful tune, and Duncan guided her through the steps. Grace focused on his face, on the warmth of his hand at her waist, and let the noise and chaos of the room fade into the background. They danced 3 dances and then took a break to get some punch. Grace was flushed and happy, more relaxed than she had felt in a crowd in years. She was talking to Mrs. Patterson and 2 other women when there was a sudden commotion at the door. 3 men stumbled in, clearly drunk, loud and boisterous. One of them knocked over a chair, and the crash made Grace jump so hard she spilled her punch. Duncan was at her side instantly, his hand on her back. "It is all right," he said quietly. But the drunk men were getting louder, bothering some of the younger women, and Grace could feel panic rising in her throat. The noise, the chaos, the aggressive male voices, it all reminded her too much of the factory, of the foreman and his friends. "I need to go outside," she whispered to Duncan. He took her arm and guided her through the crowd toward the door. But one of the drunk men stepped into their path, swaying. "Where are you going, pretty lady?" he slurred. "Dance is just getting started." "Excuse us," Duncan said firmly, trying to move around him. The drunk man grabbed Grace's arm, and she cried out. Duncan moved faster than Grace had ever seen him move, his fist connecting with the man's jaw. The drunk went down hard, and his 2 friends surged forward, but Tom and Charlie appeared out of the crowd, along with several other ranchers, and the drunk men were quickly hustled out of the schoolhouse. Duncan's hands were gentle as he examined Grace's arm where the man had grabbed her. "Did he hurt you?" "No," Grace said, though she was shaking. "I just need some air." They went outside into the cool night, and Grace breathed deeply, trying to calm down. Duncan stood close, not touching her, but present, solid, safe. "I am sorry," Grace said. "I ruined the evening." You did not ruin anything, Duncan said firmly. That fool ruined it by being drunk and grabbing you. You have nothing to apologize for. I wanted to be normal, Grace whispered. I wanted to enjoy the dance like everyone else. Duncan turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. Grace, listen to me. You are normal. You have been through something traumatic, and your body remembers it. That does not make you broken or strange. It makes you human. His gray eyes were intense in the lamplight spilling from the schoolhouse. And for what it is worth, I think you are the bravest person I know. You came all the way out here alone, married a stranger, started a whole new life. That takes courage. I did not feel brave, Grace said. I felt desperate. Bravery and desperation often look the same from the outside, Oinker, Duncan said. But you are here, and you are trying. And that is what matters. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. Do you want to go home? Grace thought about the ranch, about their quiet house, and the vast, peaceful prairie. Yes, she said, I want to go home. They said their goodbyes and rode back through the darkness, the stars bright overhead. When they reached the ranch, Duncan helped Grace down from the wagon and they stood for a moment looking up at the sky. I used to be afraid of the darkness, Grace said softly. In the city, darkness meant danger. But here, it is different. Here, the darkness is full of stars. It is full of possibility, Duncan agreed. He took her hand. Come on, let us go to bed. That night, Duncan held Grace until she fell asleep, and she dreamed of stars and open spaces and a future that felt within reach. The weeks passed, and Grace grew stronger. She learned to anticipate sounds that might startle her, to talk herself through moments of fear. Duncan continued to move quietly around her, but Grace found herself jumping less often. The ranch became truly home, the sounds of it familiar and comforting. In late October, Grace realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be sure, then told Duncan over breakfast one morning, I think I might be with child, she said, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. Duncan's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Surprise, joy, concern. How do you feel? He asked. Scared, Grace admitted, but happy too. I always wanted children. I just never thought I would have the chance. Duncan reached across the table and took her hand. You are going to be a wonderful mother. Grace went to see the doctor in Fort Stockton the following week, and he confirmed what she already knew. The baby would come in late June. Duncan was over the moon, already planning additions to the house to make room for the nursery. Grace found herself excited, too, though the fear lingered underneath. What if something went wrong? What if she was not a good mother? What if her fears and anxieties affected the child? As if sensing her thoughts, Duncan brought it up one evening as they lay in bed. You are worried about the baby, he said. How did you know? I know you. He stroked her arm gently. Talk to me. What if I am too damaged to be a good mother? Grace whispered. What if the baby makes a sudden noise and I react badly? What if I pass my fears on to our child? Duncan was quiet for a moment. I think, he said slowly, that you will be a wonderful mother precisely because you have been through hard things. You know what it is like to be afraid, so you will teach our child to be brave. You know what it is like to feel unsafe, so you will make sure our child always feels protected. Your experiences do not make you damaged, Grace. They make you strong. Grace turned to face him in the darkness. How did I get so lucky to find you? I think we found each other, Duncan said. He kissed her forehead. And I am the lucky one. Winter came to West Texas, bringing cooler temperatures, though nothing like the brutal winters Grace had known in Pennsylvania. Duncan hired Tom and Charlie again to help with winter preparations, and the ranch settled into the quieter rhythm of the cold months. Grace's pregnancy progressed, and she felt the baby move for the first time in January. Duncan pressed his hand to her belly, his face full of wonder when he felt the flutter of movement. Hello, little one, he said softly. I am your father. I cannot wait to meet you." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. This man, this quiet, patient, kind man who had taken a chance on a damaged mail-order bride and loved her into wholeness. She could not imagine her life without him now. The women of Fort Stockton rallied around Grace as her pregnancy became more visible. Mrs. Patterson organized the quilting circle to make baby clothes and blankets. The school teacher, Miss Sarah Collins, who had married Tom in a quiet ceremony in December, became a good friend. Sarah was sweet and gentle, and she and Grace spent many afternoons together sewing and talking. "I was so nervous to come west," Sarah confided one afternoon as they worked on tiny gowns for the baby. "I came from Boston to teach, and I thought I would hate it. But then I met Tom, and everything changed." "I felt the same way," Grace said. "I was so scared when I first arrived, but Duncan made me feel safe." "He is a good man," Sarah agreed. "Tom says Duncan changed after you came. He smiles more, talks more. You are good for each other." Spring arrived in a wash of wildflowers across the prairie. Grace's belly grew round, and she moved more slowly, but she was happy. Duncan doted on her, insisting she rest more and do less. He took over most of her chores and hired a woman from town to come help with the housework. In early June, Grace woke in the middle of the night with a pain in her back. She lay still for a moment, trying to determine if it was serious, and then another pain came, wrapping around her middle. The baby was coming. "Duncan," she said, shaking his shoulder. "Duncan, wake up." He was awake instantly. "What is wrong?" "The baby is coming." Duncan moved faster than Grace had seen since the night at the dance. He got Grace settled, then rode hard for town to fetch the doctor and Mrs. Patterson, who had experience with births. They arrived as the sun was rising, and Grace was already deep in labor. It was long and hard, harder than Grace had imagined. She gripped Duncan's hand and tried not to scream, but the pain was overwhelming. Mrs. Patterson coached her through it, and the doctor monitored the baby's progress. Duncan never left her side, his face pale but determined. Finally, as the sun was setting on a long June day, Grace gave birth to a son. The baby wailed lustily, and Grace felt tears stream down her face as the doctor placed him in her arms. He was perfect, red-faced and squalling, with dark hair like his father. "A boy," she whispered. Duncan leaned over them, his own eyes wet. "A son. Grace, you did it. He is perfect." They named him Daniel, after Duncan's father. Daniel Duncan Stone. The baby filled the house with noise, crying and fussing and demanding attention, and Grace found that his cries did not startle her the way other sounds did. Her body knew this sound, welcomed it even. This was her child, and every noise he made was right and good. The first months with a newborn were exhausting. Grace was up at all hours nursing Daniel, changing him, soothing him. But Duncan was there every step of the way, walking the floor with the baby when Grace needed sleep, changing diapers without complaint, marveling at every tiny expression on their son's face. One night when Daniel was about 2 months old, Grace woke to find Duncan sitting in the rocking chair with the baby, both of them silhouetted in the moonlight coming through the window. Duncan was humming softly, rocking gently, and Daniel was asleep on his chest. Grace watched them for a long moment, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was her family. This was her home. She had traveled across the country in terror and desperation, and she had found everything she never knew she needed. As summer turned to fall and Daniel grew from a newborn to an infant who smiled and cooed, Grace realized she rarely jumped at loud sounds anymore. Oh, unexpected noises still startled her sometimes, but the constant fear was gone. She had healed, slowly and steadily, in the safety of Duncan's love and the peace of their ranch. One afternoon in October, Grace was in the garden with Daniel on a blanket beside her, harvesting pumpkins. Duncan came riding in from checking the cattle, and he swung down from his horse with a grin. "Good day?" Grace asked. "Very good. The cattle are healthy, and the grass is still decent despite the dry spell." He bent to scoop up Daniel, who crowed with delight at seeing his father. "And how is my boy today?" "He rolled over," Grace said proudly, "all by himself twice." "Did you?" Duncan held Daniel up, nose to nose. "Getting strong, are you?" They went inside together, and Duncan made dinner while Grace nursed the baby. They ate together at the table, Daniel in a cradle nearby, and talked about their plans for the winter. Duncan wanted to expand the herd, and Grace wanted to plant more fruit trees in the spring. After dinner, they sat on the porch with Daniel between them, watching the sunset. The sky was on fire with color. Orange and pink and purple layered across the horizon. The air was cooling, perfect fall weather. "Duncan," Grace said softly, "do you remember what you said to me that first day, that you hoped we could be friends and see what came after?" "I remember." "I think we have found what came after." Grace looked at him, at this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. You and Daniel, you are my whole world." Duncan reached over and took her hand. "You are my world too, Grace. You and our boy. Everything good in my life started the day you stepped off that stagecoach." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. Daniel dozed between them, his tiny fist curled against his father's finger. Grace thought about the frightened woman she had been just over a year ago, jumping at every sound, afraid of her own shadow. That woman still existed inside her, but she was no longer in control. Grace had found her strength again, had learned to trust again, had learned that not all men were cruel and not all situations were dangerous. And she had learned that love could be quiet and patient and steady, that love did not have to be loud or dramatic to be real. Sometimes love was a man who learned to move softly so he would not frighten his wife. Sometimes love was breakfast made without asking, a hand reached out in the darkness, a promise kept every single day. The years flowed by like water. Daniel grew from an infant to a toddler to a little boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's gentle nature. Grace gave birth to a second child when Daniel was 2, a daughter they named Dorothy after Grace's mother. Dorothy was fiercer than Daniel, more demanding and loud, and Grace loved her fiercely. The ranch prospered under Duncan's careful management. He expanded the herd and bought more land. Tom and Charlie became permanent employees, building their own small houses on the property. Tom's wife, Sarah, gave birth to twin girls, and the ranch became a community of sorts, families growing together under the big Texas sky. Grace never completely stopped jumping at unexpected loud noises, but it became rare enough that she hardly thought about it anymore. She was too busy with her children, her garden, her friends. She hosted quilting circles at the ranch and went to church socials in town. She became a vital part of the Fort Stockton community, known for her kindness and her strength. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Duncan surprised Grace with a piano shipped all the way from San Antonio. It was an extravagant gift, one that had cost more than he wanted to tell her, but he had seen how she looked at the piano in the church and wanted to give her that joy. Grace cried when she saw it, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. She had learned to play as a girl, but had not touched a piano in years. Her fingers were clumsy at first as she relearned the keys, but slowly the music came back to her. Soon the house was filled with music in the evenings, Grace playing while Duncan and the children listened. When Grace was 29 and Duncan was 37, they welcomed a 3rd child, another boy they named Jonathan. By then, Daniel was 5 and Dorothy was 3, and they were fascinated by their new baby brother. Grace watched her 3 children playing together on the porch one afternoon and marveled at how full her life had become. "What are you thinking?" Duncan asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I am thinking about how different my life is from what I thought it would be," Grace said, leaning back against him. "When I was in Philadelphia working in that factory, I thought I would end up alone and poor, probably dying young. I never imagined this. A home, a family, happiness." "I never imagined it either," Duncan admitted. "I thought I would spend my life alone on this ranch, working until I was too old to work anymore. And then I got lonely one night and wrote an advertisement for a wife. Best decision I ever made." Grace turned in his arms to face him. There were lines on his face now that had not been there when they married, and gray was starting to show in his dark hair. But his eyes were still the same steady gray, still looking at her with love and devotion. "I love you," she said, reaching up to cup his face. "I love you too," he replied, and kissed her there on the porch with their children playing nearby and the cattle lowing in the distance, and the endless Texas sky arching overhead. The years continued their steady march. Daniel grew tall and lean, looking more like his father every day. He loved the ranch and spent every moment he could with Duncan, learning to work cattle and fix fences and manage the land. Dorothy was bright and fierce, insisting she could do anything her brother could do. She learned to ride as well as any boy and had no fear of hard work. Jonathan was the baby, sweet and gentle, with a gift for music that delighted his mother. When Grace was 35, her hair starting to show threads of silver, she and Duncan took a trip to San Antonio for their 10th anniversary. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch and the children for more than a day, and Grace felt both guilty and excited. Duncan's mother had passed away years ago, but Sarah and Tom had offered to watch the children, and Grace knew they would be fine. San Antonio was bustling and modern, bigger than Grace remembered cities being. There were hotels with electric lights and restaurants with white tablecloths. Duncan had saved for this trip, wanting to show Grace something beyond the ranch. They walked along the river, ate fancy meals, attended a concert at a grand theater. Grace wore a new dress Duncan had bought her, deep green silk that made her eyes shine. Duncan wore a suit and looked so handsome that Grace could hardly believe he was hers. On their last night in the city, they sat on the balcony of their hotel room, looking out over the lights of San Antonio. Grace was tucked against Duncan's side, his arm around her shoulders. "Thank you for this," she said. "It has been wonderful." "You deserve wonderful things," Duncan replied. "You have given me everything, Grace. A home, a family, a purpose. A trip to San Antonio is the least I can do." "You give me everything too," Grace said. "You gave me safety when I had none. You gave me patience when I needed it most. You loved me when I was too broken to love myself." "You were never broken," Duncan said firmly. "Hurt, yes. Scared, yes. But never broken. You were always strong, Grace. You just needed time to remember it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle below them. Grace thought about the mail-order bride who had stepped off the stagecoach in Fort Stockton 10 years ago, terrified and alone. She thought about the cowboy who had stood at a respectful distance, hat in hands, offering kindness to a stranger. She thought about all the small moments between then and now that had built a life, a love, a family. "I would do it again," Grace said suddenly. "If I could go back to that day in Philadelphia when I saw the advertisement, knowing nothing about what would happen, I would do it all again. Every scary moment, every hard day, every fear, because it led me to you." Duncan tightened his arm around her. "I would do it again too, every single moment." They returned to the ranch renewed and happy, greeted by 3 excited children who had missed them desperately. Life resumed its familiar rhythm. Work and play, meals and chores, the endless cycle of seasons on the Texas prairie. When Daniel turned 16, Duncan began teaching him to manage the business side of the ranch. Daniel had a good head for numbers and a natural understanding of the land. Duncan was proud of his son, and Grace loved watching them work together. Their heads bent over the account books or riding out together to check the fences. Dorothy was 13 and determined to go to college. An unusual ambition for a ranch girl, but one her parents supported. She wanted to study medicine, to become a doctor. Grace knew her daughter had the intelligence and determination to succeed at whatever she attempted. Jonathan was 11, quiet and thoughtful, more interested in music and books than cattle. Grace knew Duncan worried sometimes that Jonathan would not want to stay on the ranch, but Grace thought that was all right. They had built this life so their children would have choices, not so they would be trapped. One evening, when the children were all in bed and Grace and Duncan were alone on the porch, Duncan said, "I have been thinking." "About what?" Grace asked. "About expanding again. There is a property adjoining ours to the north that is coming up for sale. If we bought it, we would nearly double our land." He looked at her. "But it would mean taking on debt. It is a risk." Grace thought about it. They had worked so hard to build what they had, and the thought of risking it was frightening. But she also trusted Duncan's judgment, and she knew he would not suggest it if he did not think they could succeed. "What does your gut tell you?" she asked. "It's that we should do it," Duncan said. "The land is good, and with Daniel almost ready to take on more responsibility, we could manage it. But I wanted to talk to you first. We are partners in this." Grace smiled. "We are partners in everything. If you think we should do it, then I trust you. Let us buy the land." They bought the property, and it was a good decision. The expanded ranch thrived, and Daniel proved more than capable of helping manage it. By the time Daniel was 20, he was effectively running the day-to-day operations alongside his father, and Duncan was able to take a step back for the first time in decades. Dorothy left for college in Austin, studying pre-medicine at the University of Texas. Grace missed her daughter terribly, but she was proud beyond measure. Duncan grumbled about his little girl being so far away, but he wrote her long letters every week, and Grace knew he was proud too. Jonathan surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to become a teacher. He attended a teaching college and returned to Fort Stockton to teach at the school where Sarah had once taught. Sarah had retired by then, busy raising her own 5 children, and she mentored Jonathan as he started his career. Grace watched her children become adults and marveled at how quickly time had passed. It seemed like just yesterday she was holding Daniel as a newborn, and now he was talking about marrying Rebecca Johnson, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Dorothy was excelling in medical school. Jonathan was beloved by his students. On a warm evening in late spring, when Grace was 42 and Duncan was 50, they sat on the porch and watched the sun set as they had done countless times before. The house behind them was quiet now that the children were grown and gone. Duncan had aged well, his hair mostly gray now, his face lined but still handsome. Grace's hair was more silver than brown, and she had put on weight over the years, but Duncan still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. "Do you ever miss how it was in the beginning?" Duncan asked, "when it was just the two of us?" Grace thought about it. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I miss the quiet and having you all to myself. But I would not trade what we have built for anything. Our children are our legacy, Duncan. They are proof that we did something right." "We did a lot of things right," Duncan agreed. He reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after so many years. "You know what I'm most proud of?" "What?" "That we made a home where our children always felt safe, where they could be whoever they wanted to be, where they learned what love looks like." He looked at her. "You gave that to them, Grace. Your strength, your courage, your determination to heal. You showed them what it means to be brave." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "We gave it to them together." "Together," Duncan agreed. "Always together." Daniel married Rebecca the following fall in a beautiful ceremony at the church in Fort Stockton. The whole town turned out to celebrate, and Grace cried happy tears watching her son pledge his life to the woman he loved. Rebecca was smart and capable, perfect for Daniel, and she fit into the family as if she had always been there. Dorothy came home for the wedding, taking a break from medical school. She looked older, more serious, but her fierce spirit was unchanged. She told Grace about her studies, about the patients she was learning to treat, about her dreams of returning to Texas to practice medicine where it was needed most. Jonathan brought a young woman named Alice, the daughter of a merchant in Fort Stockton, and Grace suspected there would be another wedding before too long. Grace looked around at her family, all gathered together, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This life, this beautiful, complicated, messy life, was more than she had ever dreamed possible. The years continued to pass in their measured way. Daniel and Rebecca gave Grace and Duncan their first grandchild, a boy they named Andrew. Grace held her grandson for the first time and understood in a new way what her own children had meant to her. This tiny person was part of her legacy, part of the family she and Duncan had created. Jonathan married Alice, and they settled in Fort Stockton, adding to the family. Dorothy graduated from medical school and opened a practice in Fort Stockton, becoming the first female doctor in the area. She faced skepticism and prejudice, but her skill and determination won people over. Grace had never been more proud of her daughter. More grandchildren came. Daniel and Rebecca had 3 more children. Jonathan and Alice had 4, and Dorothy, who married a fellow doctor and moved to San Antonio, had 2. The ranch house was always full of noise and laughter when the grandchildren visited, and Grace reveled in it. Duncan retired from active ranch management when he was 60, turning the operation over to Daniel fully. He still rode out every day to check on things, unwilling to be completely separated from the land he loved, but he no longer carried the weight of running everything. Grace was 52, and her body was not as strong as it once was. Her knees ached sometimes, and she tired more easily. But she was happy, surrounded by family and friends, her days full of purpose and love. One afternoon, Grace and Duncan were sitting on the porch watching several of their grandchildren play in the yard. Andrew was 10 now, teaching the younger children how to rope a fence post. The scene was peaceful and perfect, quintessentially Texas. "Do you remember that first day?" Grace asked Duncan, "when I got off the stagecoach and you were standing there with your hat in your hands?" Duncan smiled. "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and also the most terrified." "I was terrified," Grace admitted, "of everything, of you, of this place, of the future, but you made me feel safe." "You made me feel needed," Duncan said, "like I had a purpose beyond just working the ranch and surviving. You gave my life meaning, Grace." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "We gave each other everything we needed." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play, the cattle grazing in the distance, the endless sky stretching overhead. Grace thought about the woman she had been, the one who jumped at every loud sound, who was afraid of her own shadow. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from another life. Grace was not afraid anymore. Oh, unexpected loud noises still startled her sometimes, but it was a normal startle, not the bone-deep terror it once was. She had healed, truly healed, in the safety of Duncan's love and the peace of their life together. "I love you," she said to Duncan, words she had said thousands of times, but which never lost their meaning. "I love you too," he replied, words he had said just as often and which were just as true every single time. As the sun set over the Texas prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, Grace Brennan Stone felt perfectly content. Her life had not been easy, and there had been times when she thought she would not survive. But she had survived, and she had thrived, and she had built something beautiful from the ashes of her fear. She had found love in the most unexpected place, with a cowboy who learned to move quietly so he would not frighten her, who had seen her at her most vulnerable and loved her anyway, who had given her a home and a family and a future she never thought she would have. The years continued to flow by. Grace and Duncan grew old together, their bodies aging but their love never diminishing. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch thrived under Daniel's management, and the family name became synonymous with integrity and hard work in West Texas. When Grace was 68 and Duncan was 76, Duncan's health began to fail. He had lived a hard life, worked long days in the sun and wind, and his body was wearing out. Grace nursed him tenderly, sitting by his bedside and holding his hand, telling him stories about their life together. "Do you have any regrets?" she asked him one afternoon as the sun streamed through the bedroom window. Duncan thought about it, his gray eyes still clear despite his body's weakness. "Only that I will not have more time with you," he said, But no, I do not regret anything about our life. Every moment was exactly as it should be. We did well, did we not? Grace said softly. We did very well indeed, Duncan agreed. He squeezed her hand. Thank you, Grace, for saying yes to a stranger's advertisement, for taking a chance on me, for building this life with me. Thank you for seeing me when I was broken and loving me anyway, Grace replied, tears running down her lined face. Thank you for learning to move quietly, for giving me time to heal, for being patient and kind and steady. Duncan passed away peacefully one evening in early spring, surrounded by his family. Grace held his hand as he took his last breath, and she felt a part of herself die with him. They had been married for 42 years, and she had loved him for every single one of them. The family gathered for the funeral, all the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren coming to honor the man who had built the ranch and the family from nothing. They buried Duncan on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the big Texas sky he had loved so much. Grace mourned him deeply, but she did not break. Duncan had taught her to be strong, had shown her she could survive anything. She continued living in the ranch house, now surrounded by family who made sure she was never alone for long. She spent her days with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, about the Wild West they would never know, about a time when things were simpler and harder and more real. She played the piano Duncan had given her, the keys worn smooth by decades of use. She tended her garden and watched the cattle graze and felt Duncan's presence in every corner of the ranch. Grace lived to be 81 years old, passing away peacefully in her sleep on a warm summer night. Her family laid her to rest beside Duncan on the hill, reuniting them in death as they had been in life. Her great-granddaughter, Dorothy's granddaughter, spoke at the funeral. She told the story of Grace Brennan, a mail-order bride who came to Texas alone and afraid, who jumped at every loud sound. She told about Duncan Stone, the cowboy who learned to move quietly near her, who loved her patiently and completely. She told about a love that built a family, a ranch, a legacy that would continue for generations. As the sun set over the ranch that evening, casting long shadows across the land, the family gathered together. Daniel's grandson, now running the ranch in his own turn, stood with his arms around his children and looked out over the land his great-grandfather had built. They had something special, he said to his wife. Something rare. True love. The kind that lasts. The kind that builds something that endures, his wife agreed, looking at the thriving ranch, the happy children, the family gathered together. And so the legacy of Grace and Duncan lived on, in the land they had worked, in the children they had raised, in the love they had shared. A mail-order bride and a cowboy, two broken people who found each other and made themselves whole. Their story became family legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that love could be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the quietest love was the strongest of all. The ranch continued to thrive. The family continued to grow. And on the hill overlooking it all, two headstones stood side by side, marking the resting place of Grace Brennan Stone and Duncan Stone. Beloved wife and husband, mother and father, grandmother and grandfather. Two souls who had found each other across distance and fear and built something beautiful that would last long after they were gone. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the prairie and the cattle lowed in the distance, some of the family swore they could feel their presence still, watching over the land they loved, together for all eternity, just as they had promised on their wedding day so many years ago.